We're seeing such a deluge of news stories now. Almost every week we're hearing of another awful case in some otherwise tranquil town being meted out against the people of this country by individuals that should not even be here.
Following the conviction of two Afghan men for raping a 15-year-old girl, is it fair to say that Afghans are overrepresented when it comes to rapes and sexual assaults in Britain?
I don't just think it's fair to say, I think it's essential that we point this fact out. Of course, it's not just actually the Ministry of Justice data, which does show Afghans 22 times more likely to be convicted of sexual offences than Brits. It's also the data which shows they are hugely more likely to be convicted of sexual offences than other national groups in the UK. So they're 135 times more likely to be convicted than an Australian living in the UK. This is a huge problem, and I actually think we're seeing such a deluge of news stories now. Almost every week we're hearing of another awful case in some otherwise tranquil town being meted out against the people of this country by individuals that should not even be here. That it's essential the conversation recognises what is a fundamental empirical fact and starts actually looking at what should be done going forward to make sure that we completely stop these atrocities taking place. And I think a huge part of this needs to be following in a similar vein to Donald Trump and introducing a high-risk list of countries where individuals from certain nationalities that are overrepresented in crime stats simply aren't able to come into the country. And I also think we need to start looking back at those that have come in recent years, especially those that are coming across on small boats and we don't know anything about, and whether actually a lot of asylum claims have been illegitimately and improperly awarded asylum status purely because of a woefully incompetent Home Office that frankly is no longer fit for purpose. So I think going forward, the conversation doesn't just need to recognise these facts, it actually needs to start talking about what it does as a result of this, what the national conversation needs to be as a result of this. So I think a red list is essential. I think reviews of asylum cases is essential. I also think we need to start looking towards making crime committed in the UK by a foreign national being an aggravating offence. I think actually some of the instances of not just Afghans, but other nationalities that have, foreign nationals that have come into the UK and committed heinous attacks and then being given very, very limited sort of community service sentences are wholly inappropriate for the nature of the crime. And it's not just the awful, evil crime of sexual assault or drug offences or whatever it might be. It's also the abuse of hospitality. And I think it's far past the time that we should have been a lot more tough in actually making sure that those coming into the country are on their very best behaviour, because it's clearly not happening at this moment in time.
Now, you at the Centre for Migration Control have done a lot of research on official government data and statistics, analysing the difference in crime rates between, say, Afghans and Brits and all those different nationalities that have come into Britain in recent years. And as you say, your data suggests, or your analysis suggests, that Afghans and lots of other nationalities are far more likely to commit these kind of crimes, sexual assaults, rapes, murders, and so on, than British people are. And you have been accused of exaggerating the data by certain media companies like Sky News or The Times, Fraser Nelson, people like that. Can you perhaps respond to some of that criticism that says, actually, there isn't this difference between Brits and Afghans and other nationalities?
This is actually what the real problem is when it comes to having this conversation is, let's take the Sky News example, for instance. This was an attempt to really pull the wool over the eyes of the British public. It was an attempt to use really, really faulty methodology to deflate the rate at which Afghans are committing sexual offences and to overemphasise the rate at which British nationals are committing sexual offences, and they did that by choosing a wholly inappropriate denominator. So data from the Ministry of Justice on convictions by sexual offences is done on the basis of nationality. I would like to see it on country of birth. I think that's far more telling as to what the actual impacts of migration are, but as it is, we only have it on nationality. So therefore, if you've got a numerator which is nationality, you have to use a denominator that is also nationality. Otherwise, you are comparing apples and pears and doing a wholly ridiculous statistical analysis, and that is exactly what Sky News did. And it was actually a piece that was so cobbled together and so desperate to reach a conclusion that Afghans aren't more likely to be committing sexual offences than Brits, that they made a whole raft of statistical mistakes, but also journalistic mistakes. So there was the invention of quotes by Oxbridge academics, which they subsequently had to remove from the article. They based their analysis on advice that they'd been given by the Metropolitan Police, that actually it turned out the Metropolitan Police had given them the wrong advice, so they had to add a correction at the bottom of that article. They misattributed what the Office for National Statistics had told them as well. And yet the brazenness of this news organisation, and to leave it up there despite all these inaccuracies, despite all this untoward practice, really shows, I think, what we are up against when it comes to having a conversation about the real impacts of mass migration. Because, as I said, the simple fact of the matter is Afghan nationals are 22 times more likely to be convicted of sexual offences than Brits. Last year alone, a quarter of sexual assault convictions were of foreign nationals. They're only just over 10% of the population in England and Wales. Last year, a quarter of rape convictions were of foreign nationals. All the data, all the available data we have points to a very, very significant problem that is taking place in this country. And we know for a fact that it is certain nationalities more likely. It's not going to be grannies coming from Luxembourg here. It's going to be young men coming from countries which have a very difficult relationship with law and order, have a very different attitude to women and girls. And actually, I really don't think, perhaps when you look at the conditions of some of these countries and the cultures in which individuals are being socialised, that I really don't think it's surprising that these statistics are actually playing out in this country. I think it's far-fetched utopian liberal dreaming to suggest that just because an individual has somehow set foot in Britain, they've suddenly eschewed the 25 or so years of lived experience and cultural imbuement that they've seen in their own country. So I think we're reaching a tipping point now. I think the British public have cottoned on that the sort of mainstream myth that that's been peddled for so long about mass migration being beautiful is a simple lie. And I think the sort of devastating daily deluge of news stories that we now have of illegal migrants committing crimes against young women and girls is so overwhelming and so powerfully significant in terms of it being unlike anything this country, I think, has probably ever seen, that I really think a government coming in 2029 is not going to be able to deliver half measures. They're going to have to go full throttle. They're going to have to introduce that red list of high-risk countries. They're going to have to start reviewing the status of individuals already in this country, because I just simply think at this point nothing else will suffice.
It is interesting that you talk about the data that's available, because I know that your analysis is based on FOI requests that you do to government departments, so the Ministry of Justice, the Home Office and so on. But we haven't got the full picture when it comes to migrant crime data. Is that right? Are you trying to get more of that information? Is there a kind of cover-up in a way because the government isn't releasing all of the data that they could be on, say, who's committing crimes in Britain today?
So I think there's 2 points that I'd make to that. First of all, I don't think we're getting the full picture because a lot of migrants that have come to the UK and ultimately falling foul of the law have naturalised and are therefore in these statistics classified as British citizens. So when I mentioned, for instance, the quarter of sexual assaults last year, that figure will be far higher when it comes to actually people that have moved to the UK. So that's one point that I'd like to make. I think secondly, the Ministry of Justice, the Home Office, the Office for National Statistics, these are departments that have been so wedded to, as I said, the idea of mass migration being a universal good, that they would never even countenance that this information is somehow pertinent, and actually recognising that certain groups are more likely to be engaged in certain types of crime really irks and offends their sensibilities. And this is actually the real reason why we ended up with such a problem with the Pakistani rape gangs, was because the data simply wasn't being collected on the ground. And actually we still see problems when it comes to data collection from the Ministry of Justice or police forces, in that actually individuals aren't required to provide their immigration status. So we have quite a good idea of the nationality now, but actually when it comes to, are they an asylum seeker, are they here on a tourist visa, are they here resident, do they have indefinite leave to remain, are they now a British citizen? We don't have that information. I actually think that is the next hurdle that we need to clear. We need to recognise that if we're able to see, for instance, that those with refugee status are X times more likely, if we're able to see that actually there's a propensity of those with indefinite leave to remain or settlement to be committing crimes, then we can start having a conversation about what we do going forward. And I think actually on that settlement point, on that indefinite leave to remain point. A large part of that just needs to be the immediate revocation of indefinite leave to remain if any crime is committed. That currently isn't the case, unfortunately, unless it's a certain threshold is met and the Home Secretary is able to make a judgment that it's in the public good to remove that status. So I think that the real frontier that we need to start pushing for, those of us that are concerned about this issue, is immigration status, because that gives us a real sense as to what really is going on with our immigration policy. And I think actually that will be something that raises a lot of very uncomfortable questions for the Home Office, because the Home Office for far too long just doesn't consider any of this information relevant. It's not even able to tell us, for instance, since 2021, how many visas it has awarded to individuals, how many visas it has awarded to individuals that have a criminal background. And this is an absolutely astonishing admission from the department that's meant to be keeping us safe. The fact that they actually don't know how many people have come legally into the UK who are perhaps a security threat and perhaps pose a risk to the welfare of British people. So there's a whole panoply of decisions that aren't actually taken at the moment because of this obstinance to actually collect proper, useful data.
Obviously, you do this analysis of official government data, but in a way, sometimes you can kind of forget that there are real stories, real lives being destroyed by these sexual assaults, these rapes. You know, I mentioned this case in Leamington Spa with these two Afghans who were convicted of raping a teenage girl. We've seen this vast wave, seemingly, of crimes being committed by lots of foreign nationals in Britain. I want to ask about where and why these people are in the country. Why are there so many Afghanis in Britain today? Can you talk about maybe the resettlement scheme and who is responsible for letting in so many people from Afghanistan, from some of these other third world countries into Britain?
So on the Afghanistan point, you're absolutely right. There were two resettlement schemes opened up in 2021, and then actually it turned out there had been a secret, even larger third scheme opened up by the then Defence Secretary Ben Wallace. And this was really, I think, will go down in history as totemic of one of the great deceits that the political establishment has tried to pull over the British public. These were tens of thousands of individuals being smuggled in the dead of night, not appearing on any official government data, not appearing in any statistics, just being brought into this country and dropped on communities. I actually think what really happened with this was we had a kind of a dying age of political thought, of a kind of bygone era, this idea of we have obligations towards people who were fighting alongside us. I really think that was a wholly inappropriate attitude to have, actually. I think a lot of these individuals weren't fighting because they believed in the British state. A lot of them were fighting because it was a job. A lot of them were fighting because it helped them with their own political wrangling in that situation. A lot of them, frankly, actually in no way emblematic of British values or of the interests of the British state. But we, in our naivety, or I should say the politicians in their naivety, assume that because these individuals had been on the books of the British state and working with the armed forces, somehow we had a duty towards them. And of course, actually, many of them weren't even actually former employees of the British Army. In fact, many of them had just simply appeared on a leaked list that the Ministry of Defence had somehow managed to leak in its infinite wisdom. And then, of course, actually, within that as well, there were many applications of individuals who hadn't even appeared on this list. We just threw open a wide net and allowed anyone who could make any legitimate or apparently legitimate claim to come to the country. So that, I think, when it comes to Afghans, it is a large consideration, of something that I don't think there's been enough reckoning of the Conservative Party for actually conducting in such a duplicitous manner. We've also got then, of course, the near 200,000 individuals who have come across on small boats since 2018, and I think actually, rather than think, okay, we're going to have a lot more illegal migrants that we need to deal with and remove from the country, we therefore need to invest in our detention estate, which is incredibly small. It's only about 2,000 beds at the moment. The Conservatives took the conscious decision to redirect billions of pounds towards these long-term contracts when it comes to hotels and houses of multiple occupancy. They've exploded the asylum bill, which has increased near sixfold since 2019. Since 2019, we've spent 16 billion already on the asylum system. So they took a conscious decision there, rather than actually start asserting the national interest and detaining and deporting everyone who came across. they gave them full access to an asylum system that is incredibly outdated, incredibly easy to game, and the result has been a ever increasing number coming across and seeing this route as a viable opportunity to get settlement in this country. And that's, of course, something that the Labour government are now doubling down on, and they're effectively granting an amnesty to those who come across the channel. They're saying you will be on a route to settlement, but you'll have to wait a little bit longer. Well, no, I'm sorry, that shouldn't be the way we approach this.
You say that Labour are effectively offering amnesty to illegal migrants, but they would say that they are deporting lots of illegal migrants. They're always talking about Keir Starmer and others, how many illegal migrants they've deported since they became, since they got into office. So how do you respond to that actually they are deporting thousands of illegals in Britain?
The number of removals of small boat migrants has actually fallen since the Labour government took office. The number of people being put up in hotels has increased in the last 3 months. And actually, when you see them bragging about these headline figures, 50,000 people deported or removed from the UK, they're pulling the wool, as I said, again, over the eyes of the British public, because most of those that are being returned from the country, not deported, most of them leave without the Home Office even being aware, are coming from European countries. They're coming from countries that actually aren't really the problem. They're coming from places like Brazil or some countries in Southeast Asia. They're not coming from those countries that are the real problem when it comes to illegal migration. They're not coming from they're not being returning individuals to Afghanistan, Eritrea, Pakistan. Actually, is a very, very significant problem. It's not always up there in the small boats crossings, but when it comes to illegitimate asylum claims and visa overstays, Pakistan is a huge problem. And I think there's a whole separate conversation that can be had there about visa bans on that country as well, and other countries with a similar propensity to overstay. So this is one of the most egregious lines that the Home Office has been trotting out in recent months. They've been desperate to show that they've moved on from the failure of the Conservatives and they've brought some kind of order. But actually, the idea that they've deported, as they say, 50,000 is a flat-out lie. That number that they've actually deported is only a little above where it was under Conservatives, so around about 10, 11,000. Most of them, as I said, are almost unrecorded returns. They're individuals that have left the country that the Home Office has only sussed out subsequently, so they can take no credit for that. But yet it doesn't stop immigration ministers like Mike Tapp appearing regularly on TV, parroting this incredibly tough line that this is a government that's very serious. They're not. And actually, I think when it comes to the amnesty, which they are granting to those that come into the country illegally by giving them a route to settlement, that is something that is only going to increase the pull factor when it comes to the small boats crisis. And then, this is before, of course, we even get onto the most damning part of their asylum plan, which is to increase safe and legal routes around the world. And they're doing so in cooperation with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And this is an organisation that identifies tens of millions of individuals around the world that it thinks could very well be an individual used under a safe, viable to go to the West under a safe and legal route. So we're effectively actually handing control of our asylum policy to another international quango with no accountability.
Okay, so I want to go back to this case of these two Afghans who were just convicted for the rape of a 14-year-old or 15-year-old girl, actually, in Leamington Spa. And an independent member of parliament, Muslim member of parliament, wrote this on X. His name is Adnan Hussein. Send them back and let them face justice the Afghan way. Do you agree with this Muslim member of parliament? And how would you deal with foreign sex offenders in Britain?
I agree. If they come from Afghanistan, they should go back to Afghanistan. There's no question about that. I don't know why people are queasy about that suggestion. Even if you look at the data, people are volunteering to return to Afghanistan. People are going back to Afghanistan on their own terms. So I don't think we should somehow let this idea that they're going to face degrading or inhumane treatment in any way blind us from what's in the national interest. And that is a simple fact that, especially if you're a foreign national offender, but also if you're an illegal migrant, if that's your country of origin, that is where we're going to send you back to. And I think that will incentivise individuals to not come to Britain, to not come through dozens of safe countries looking for the land of milk and honey here. And actually, they might focus their intent a bit more. They might see actually it more in their interest to claim asylum in the first European country that they come to, and we can therefore maybe circumnavigate some of the problems that are coming. I'm very, very strong in my view on this. I think that any individual who is a foreign national and comes to the UK and commits a crime, any crime, I'm even talking sort of speeding tickets here, should be sent back to their country. Unfortunately, we have I think it's about 19,000 foreign national offenders at the moment who have been convicted of serious crimes that we've not been able to remove because we've not been able to convince either immigration tribunals or their country of origin to take them back. And I think, again, there's another problem with immigration tribunals who are effectively open border advocates masquerading behind the facade of the British establishment, and there's a lot that needs to be done on that. But when it comes to actually the countries of origin refusing to take these individuals back, we're the sixth biggest economy in the world. We give out billions every year in foreign aid. We give out millions of tourist visas every single year. We have effectively trade deficits with a lot of countries. We allow them their nationals in this country to send billions in remittances. Let's stop pulling on these levers and let's stop making life uncomfortable for those countries of origin, because at the moment we're allowing ourselves to be pushed around by countries that have no actual real negotiating power, because we are simply too averse to the idea of actually being a bit stringent and saying, no, look, Pakistan, you are going to take back your foreign national offenders. Look, Afghanistan, we're going to send you back these individuals. Look, Eritrea, these individuals are coming back your way. And if you don't agree to this, we're going to make it now impossible for you to do any business with us. We won't lose from that. It will be them that suffer, and it will be their economy or their sort of cultural horizons that are stymied as a result of that. So I think it's high time we actually started getting back to a good old-fashioned British foreign policy, which is prepared to use might and prepared to use power and prepared to be a lot more tough. And it really eschews this idea of liberal internationalism, which has led us nowhere but down a malaise of open borders, of multiculturalism, and effectively anything but British being prioritised.
So you talked about Pakistan there and foreign extraditions. So the Pakistani government have demanded recently the extradition of 2 political dissidents in exchange for accepting rape gang abusers in the UK. What do you make of this demand from the Pakistani government, and how would you respond if you were in government today?
Well, I'm sorry, we can't be held accountable for every ill that might happen in any corner of the world. This is not a problem. These are individuals that have clearly got some beef with the Pakistani state. It is not for us to have to try and mediate that and get involved and insert ourselves in every dispute that an individual has with their country or their regional government. This is really actually an open-ended invitation for things to really get out of control. If we start saying, there's an individual that's maybe fallen afoul of certain laws in whatever far-flung country it might be, and therefore they have an incredibly legitimate case to asylum in this country, then we're just going to end up opening up a can of worms where anyone that fancies staying in this country puts in the most spurious disputes that they've had with their government. And actually we do see this when it comes to asylum claims. We see more and more instances of this, which is an individual who's trying to claim that they can't be removed to their country of origin because they're a dissident. They have no evidence to show that they are a dissident, but then what they do and what they're advised to do by immigration lawyers is to just put a post on Facebook sort of saying, down with my government, or something along those lines, and therefore they're able to make that more legitimate claim that if they are returned to their country of origin, they're going to face degrading and inhumane treatment, and thus Article 3 of the ECHR clicks in. And this is why the whole idea that Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, is going to be able to renegotiate Article 3 and Article 8 of the ECHR is so ridiculous, because Article 3 is an absolute right. There's no mediation of it. There's no accompanying consideration of the public interest. If someone is able to make a claim that they will suffer degrading and inhumane treatment in their country of origin and therefore can't be sent back, that has nothing to act as a counterpose to that, and that is therefore effectively taken as gospel. So how many times have we heard this idea that a British politician is going to go and renegotiate a treaty, whether it be a European or international, and then come back with nothing to show for it? And I think, unfortunately, this is going to be another instance of that. And the sooner the Labour government realise, I mean, they probably do already realise that the only way to solve this problem is to leave the ECHR, but they're sort of low-grade backbenchers with very, very little qualification or understanding of how the world works simply won't let them, and therefore they're going to sort of allow this problem to continue to fester because and throw up compromises because they're just simply not able to confront the cold hard reality.
What did you make of the recent BBC Question Time show in which they featured the voices of illegal migrants in Britain, one of whom I believe was from Iran, and was talking about the ECHR and the Northern Ireland Protocol?
I thought it was disgraceful. It was actually the first Question Time I tuned into for a long time, and I was gobsmacked by not just those two individuals, but just the general tenor of the conversation. The individuals that were being put up to ask questions, coming from a very, very certain viewpoint that actually only a minority of the country hold. When it comes to the two illegal migrants, you could see what it was. It was an attempt to pull at the emotional heartstrings of those viewing at home, the overwhelming majority of the public that want every single illegal migrant deported. I think it's about two-thirds now, recent polling suggests want every single illegal migrant deported. And this was an attempt by the BBC to use their flagship political discussion programme as a means to try and present a human side to things that I think they think we've not considered when we've reached our conclusion that mass deportations are the only option. I think by presenting this Iranian chap as somehow a sort of learned scholar, a KC, when it comes to Britain's constitutional law was ridiculous. And then, of course, we had the other individual who'd come from Afghanistan who admitted that he'd come through and made asylum claims in 6 other countries and they'd all rejected him. But yet we, being the soft touch that we are and led by the witless Home Office, had given him asylum as his 7th time of asking. So I actually think it's backfired on them. I think it's made them look very condescending. I think it's made them look out of touch. I think they know they've lost the argument now. I think they know actually, with dwindling viewing figures, their ability to shape public opinion is at an all-time low. And I think I'm glad they've done it, to be perfectly honest with you, because all it's done is just shown the sheer disconnect that now exists between the BBC and the people of this country.
Okay, Robert Bates, thank you.